So this is a term that I picked up from a psychologist in Seattle, Charles Johnson, and it's capacitance is like the ability to hold, the ability to contain something, and so this is the ability to hold, tolerate, to be with things that are uncomfortable, without trying to get rid of them, without trying to deny them or resolve them, to just be there. And some of the things that we find difficult to just be there with is complexity. It's like too much, too complex. I can't look at it anymore. It's just, I need to simplify it. In order to hold it, I need to simplify it. And somebody who has a high level of capacitance doesn't need to oversimplify something. Even when they come to conclusions about it or simplify parts of it, they do that knowing that it is more complex than they're saying. There's more to it than what they're saying. They do hold their models and lightly, and acknowledge that complexity is virtually infinite. So they will sit with the fact that that's true, and work humbly with whatever pieces of the complexity they need to work with, while admitting that there's a dense fabric of interconnectedness and elements and causes or whatever involved in this situation. And we're going to work within that knowledge. Uncertainty, very similar. We can't tell what's going to happen for sure. So rather than acting as if things are certain, or things are stable and we know what's going on, we acknowledge that we know things conditionally, we know things temporarily, and there's a lot of uncertainty as it bridges over into mystery. I mean, there's some essential qualities to the way life and reality are put together, which do not lend themselves to nailing down solidly. It doesn't mean we can't function as if we know certain things. There are, you can pick up the spoon and be sure it's going to go to your mouth, which 99.999% of the time it's going to. But there's a 0.0001% of the time when it doesn't, which is very disturbing. And most things are much less certain than the ability to get your spoon from the plate to your mouth. So having a collegial, friendly relationship with uncertainty, and recognizing that certainty is an emotion. The certainty is not necessarily tied to the factualness of something. Unfortunately, you can be very certain of something that's totally false. So sensing, again, this sense of conditionality. You can be certain of things conditionally and ready to shift if you get good reason to shift. So being able to sit with the uncertain, the existential uncertainty of life, to be able to just hold that, tolerate that, letting it disturb you and not having to do anything about that. Mystery, you look harder and harder and harder and you can't figure it out. And there's, the big mystery, the capital M mystery, is a fundamental thing. Like, where does reality come from? We have established things that it's, reality is something solid. I can pound on a table and it's really there. And yet we have quantum mechanics telling us that no, there's just fields of probability going on here. There's in a sense nothing there, and mystics look and they go, it's just all void, and it's like, but it's still here. So what's going on? And we can tell various stories about that, and that's all fine and good, but language and concepts and human cognition are insufficient to grasp everything. So there's also a fundamental mystery to life, and to be awed by that, to be respectful of that, to carry on life, even though there's this mystery, or grateful that there's this mystery. For some people, there's a lot of flexibility in life because this mystery is there, and there's no box to contain it, and therefore, to a certain extent, there's no box to contain their spirit. So there's the ability to hold it without getting rid of it, to be with it. Paradox, the yin yang, the sense of here are things that are opposite, that should not coexist. Being able to hold that, to be able to see multiple viewpoints that seem to be irreconcilable, to be able to step into somebody else's shoes and just be there and go, there may be no resolution to this. There's a dance going on between these. Is a fetus a living human being? The pro-lifers focus on, yes, it is, and you should never kill any unborn child, no matter how early its gestation process is. And the pro-choice people say a woman needs to be able to control her body, and there should not be unwanted children. A woman should not have to bear a child that was not intended and should not be born. And both sides are true. And so there's a dance that goes on between them, and the need to resolve, to totally invalidate the other side in order to push the agenda of one side, rather than to see it as this complex thing that needs constantly to be part of our conversation and our feeling our way, and never will resolve. There's lots of issues like that. And what the generative use of paradox is the dance between the two alternatives or forces that are going on, and just holding it and letting them be there. Conflict, your view versus my view, we're going to fight about it. Or having people being in the presence of people who are fighting, and not being able to just be with it. The need to take sides, the needs to run away because the energy of the conflict is so disturbing. We need to have people who can hold conflict, who are not conflict averse, not trying to get rid of it or move away from it or cause it. They're just there with it, so that whatever needs to get worked through has the time and space to be worked through. Crisis, it's like, oh my God, I can't take it. It's just too much. Again, the sense of too much. And there are people who are much more level-headed in a crisis, and people who just go totally off the handle in a crisis. And the people who are more level-headed tend to be, not always, but tend to have more capacitance. Sometimes the level-headed people are just pushing something. They've grabbed onto a solution that's going to solve it, and you have to do it my way, and they push everybody around. That's not an example of capacitance. Somebody who's with the crisis and feeling their way and responsive to the various forces and people that are going on in the crisis, without getting thrown off their center. That's more what I'm talking about with capacitance. And diversity, it's like, you are so off the wall. I mean, I can't even imagine how you could think this way, how you could be this way, how you could act this. I can't imagine it. Or it is totally distasteful. Everything about the humanist in me rejects the Nazi in you. And or just strange, people from another culture, whatever. That, and the desire to have things simplified, like into us and them, again, to minimize the diversity, to deny the diversity, because it is too much, too other, too incomprehensible. Those are signs of lack of capacitance. To be able to, if we're all unique, which we are, diversity is an intrinsic part of life, and to be always kind of open to seeing, oh, there's another dimension of diversity, and I'm either comfortable with it or not comfortable with it, but I can just be with that. Even if I'm not comfortable with the level of diversity, I can go, it's not because of them or you that's the problem, it's because I don't know how to deal with it, and to just be with that. All these kinds of disturbance can also open us up to more of what's real, to more of what's really there, because reality is not black and white. Reality is always more complex, nuanced, uncertain, paradoxical, and to be able to be with that fact as it both generally and as it applies in the specific circumstance you're working with, and then take action anyway, make decisions anyway, relate to people anyway, to try to enhance, make life more beautiful, more real, more sustainable, to do that in the face of all this stuff. And because we recognize these things, we are more able to hold more. And the purpose is to take into account what needs to be taken into account for long-term broad benefit, and to have the capacity to hold more allows us to take into account more, and more includes the other and the confusing. And the extent we can take that into account, we are taking into account a larger reality, and that allows us to be more wise, and allows each of the elements, the complexity has something to offer to us. Not only that there's complex entities and relationships going on in whatever we're looking at, but the complexity itself has lessons for us. So, and the diverse people, each one has gifts for us. So the extent we can hold these things without turning away from them or reducing them, allows us to fulfill our mission of taking into account what needs to be taken into account for long-term broad benefit. And there are some methods that will support this. An awful lot of what supports this are personal practices and consciousness, patience, waiting, patience even when you're taking action, because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you do your sort of test action, see how this works, and then wait and find out. You don't have to wait before you take action, but you do have to have the ability to sit with the fact that you don't know, and you're giving it a try and seeing what happens. And that kind of waiting is an example of capacitance. Meditation, lots of meditations train you to just be present with whatever is. And that can include internal conditions, external conditions, but the ability to be present. You can train your consciousness, your attention to be present. And prayer, some people find the ability to accept, to trust the serenity prayer as a standard prayer. People say, to the courage to act on, change things that need to be changed, and the serenity, the acceptance to accept the things that I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. This is, if you can live into that, there's a level of serenity there. And Buddhist practice and theory is largely about acceptance and non-attachment. Things are going to be, things are going to be changing. And so the fact that you're not attached allows you to let them happen without getting upset, and be able to be with whatever goes on. And some people express that as trust in whatever is going to happen. And some people just say, I'm not attached. I don't have to trust. I'm just not attached to what happens. And there's this at the psychological dimension, sharing feelings, the support group kind of scene, the coaching, certain kinds of coaching, whatever, having people that you can share your feelings as you're going through periods of disturbance can allow you to hold the disturbance and not have an emotional entanglement with the disturbance. And there's a practice called tapping, which helps reduce the intensity of various kinds of emotions, including anxiety. Practices like that can help you manage your anxiety, your need to have things change from what they are. And then there's perspectives, which can be intellectual or deep belief systems that are sort of worldview, sort of the way you look at things. The evolutionary perspective, the big picture of evolutionary time, evolutionary change, can help you see whatever it is you're wrestling with in a larger context. Systemic thinking, to be able to sense into the larger system and always assume that larger systems are at play, are being impacted, are causing certain things. This can help you embrace more complexity, because that's what systems thinking is about, as well as complexity science says. Okay, complexity science says so much of what goes on has to be addressed with probability. Let's look in terms of probability rather than specific cause and effects and linear kinds of consciousness. And the the big cosmos, does the universe actually care what happens in this situation? We don't have to worry about that. If you people who can take that perspective have a certain distance between them and the specifics of specific situations. And some people, it just disconnects them from the reality of those situations, and other people, it gives them space to be creative and engage and hold and coexist with the realities of life. And intuitive practices, if things get to be too much, that phrase too much can have many meanings. It's too much of reality, too intense, whatever. So when things get to be too much, intuitive practices can help shift gears from stimulus response, from rationality into a deeper place. Dreaming, some people do dream work, some people just sleep on it. Tarot and I Ching and other oracles can be like a Rorschach, which you let go and look into that space and see what comes up that can help you think and feel into the disturbing whatever it is. I've never done automatic writing, but I've heard it's a way for the unconscious to show up, other parts of you, earlier childhood parts, etc., whatever. Poetry and art, I know I've used poetry and art that way, and there's some very specific practices to help you move into the intuitive realms using reading poetry and art. Computer modeling is one way to handle complexity. That's the way we handle climate complexity. And again, all of these are limited one way or another. Computer modeling is only as good as information you put in. And some people choose to focus on smaller scales, that the whole larger problematique of the world, as they say, is so big. If we focus on personal and local scales, but keep in mind, it's like think globally, act locally, kind of, to hold the larger field of information and scale perspective, but to apply that here and now is another approach that people have. It's not oversimplifying, it's just localizing the dynamics that you're looking at. You can see their manifestations more readily and more substantively. And the idea of working together, this is all confusing. It's hard to hold this by myself, so let's talk about it. And having good facilitation helps you talk about it in ways that the group is holding whatever it is that you can't hold by yourself. A group can hold. If the group is of good heart, they know each other, or they're getting good facilitation, to be able to hold something together rather than alone. Lots of different support groups exist for that, and activist groups, etc. And facilitators themselves, because they're having to deal with what other people can't hold, the individuals in the group are not able to hold whatever it is that's going on. So they're calling on the facilitator to help them hold it collectively. But the facilitator is being exposed to that but not being able to enter into the conversation. They just have to learn to be present. Good facilitator probably meditates a lot and stuff, to be able to be present with the wild energies, difficult energies that they're facing in certain groups. And for an example of handling paradox, polarity management is a specific practice for noticing that polarities are not problems to solve. They are energies and factors that need to be managed because they're always interacting with each other. When you get too much of one, the other one pulls in energy to reduce that, so there's more balance. And it's just it gets extreme, left and right banging back and forth. And polarity management gives ways to make it so it's not so extreme. That back and forth still exists, but it's more like a dance than a battle or a slamming back and forth. So those are all tools and approaches to manifesting or increasing individual and collective capacitance.